A new book on the history of the dance from primary sources. Oh, you can't stop me. I'm going to get that, I'm going to read it, and then I'm going to tell you about it. Hi, I'm Kashmir, and I've just finished reading Helen Ward's Egyptian Belly Dance and Transition, the Raqṣ Revolution, 1890 to 1930. Now, when you're looking at any sort of history, it's always best to go back to primary sources. Earlier I'd spoken of Fraser's book where she used French sources to look at the dance. So this was an outsider's view, whereas Ward tends to use Arabic sources, so they're actually looking at what people in Egypt, what the newspapers, what the playbills actually said locally. Also, this one here is closer to where we think of as Raqṣ beginning, whereas Fraser's book was just a wee bit earlier. Now, prior to 1890 in Egypt, there were three main streams of dance. There was the baladi, which everybody did. There was the awalam, which was at this stage the professional urban dancers, and the Ghawazi, who were the rural professional dancers. So awalam always had a slightly higher status than the Ghawazi, but they were basically professional dancers for people's events. But about somewhere around 1890, things started to change, and her book looks at some of these changes and the influences that were in it. So she starts looking at an overview of the Egyptian arts and entertainment scene around the end of the century. And there were a number of things that were coming through which were new. One was the rise of entertainment venues, that is, venues that were purely for putting on entertainment. Prior to that, if you had a dancer or a singer or some sort of entertainer, it was associated with an event. So a mulad, a wedding, a circumcision, something like that. So there was a purpose, and the entertainment came along to help with the celebration. Around the end of the 19th century, you suddenly got entertainment halls, etc., that were actually built just for people to sit there and to be entertained. So this was new. What was also new was some fusing of foreign elements, and the foreign elements included both European elements and North African and other Middle Eastern elements. So that was coming in as well. And sort of contrary to that, there was also a rise of Egyptian nationalism and a creation of an Egyptian culture which blended these elements together. So a lot of the entertainment was actually quite political in its own way. She then narrows in on the dance itself. What were the audience like? What was the dance like? What were the costumes like? So she looks at entertainment halls well before Badia's Sala that included dancers. She looked at how the dancers were billed, and she also looked at what could be told, what could be seen, what could be understood about their dance technique. Now this was a little difficult because visual representation of the dance over the period of about World War I is a bit sketchy. However, she did manage to establish that, as expected, early Raqṣ involved solo, improvisation and torso work with very little footwork, if any. So the later movies that you see were different from the earlier versions of the Raqṣ. So Raqṣ started far more stationary, far more like the baladi, awalam, Ghawazi dance that it actually came from. Another interesting point about the movies, between the 30s and the 60s there were a number of movies which featured awalam or Ghawazi, but they were always played, well almost always played by Raqṣ dancers. So the technique you see there, the costuming you see there, the choreography you see there is strongly influenced by the Raqṣ background. And again, from the 1930s, there was evidence to suggest that style of Raqṣ is a little bit different than the earlier styles. She also looked at how the costume changed over that period. and it's quite fascinating. She's illustrated it with a number of photographs. She does have her chapter on myth busting for Badia, so she looks at what people believe about her and about what she's contributed and what the evidence would suggest. And the evidence would suggest that we wander around with a number of incorrect or not entirely correct beliefs, and some of it is actually based on the work that Badia herself used to publicise what she did. Ward is also very staunch that this is an Egyptian dance, and she totally dismisses the idea that it was created for Europeans or the elite. And she points to the number of the wide acceptance of Raqṣ when it came in, the low cost of the halls and how it was accepted as a dance form. However, she doesn't actually look at why the Egyptians suddenly wanted something that was so different. And so the whole concept of self-colonisation isn't actually addressed. Also interesting is she points out the number of foreign dancers, that is from North Africa and Turkey, who were performing in Egypt at that time. And no doubt they also brought their own fusions in to what would become Raqṣ. So, should you get it? I would say yes. It's 200 pages, quite a few black and white photos, extensive, well not extensive, but there are chapter notes. There's quite an extensive bibliography and an index as well. It's not a difficult read, although you need a reasonable reading level. So this isn't an academic treatise that has paragraphs that are single sentences and use a whole lot of gobbledygook. But you need to be able to read it a bit more than just a newspaper level. So it will take time and it will take concentration, but I think it's well worth it. So if you're interested in the history of the dance and you want to see what is actually out there, what can be proven, then I would recommend this book.